Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm the librarian at the Ashurbanipal Library of the Assyrian Cultural Foundation. Thank you for joining us for the last lecture in our Nabu Circle Lecture Series presentation entitled Rediscovering Assyria. I'm very happy to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Jamie Novotny, and he will be speaking on Assyria's last rulers. Jamie Novotny earned his PhD from the University of Toronto and is a tenured senior researcher at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich and co-director of the Munich Open Access Cuneiform Corpus Initiative. Specializing in the history of the Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian empires and their textual remains, his numerous publications include the monographs on royal inscriptions, including those of Assyria's final rulers, Ashurbanipal, Ashur-etil-ilani, and Sin-Shara-ishkun. In 612 BC, a Babylonian-Median alliance led by Nebuchadnezzar and Cyaxares captured and destroyed the once grand and once all-important Assyrian metropolis Nineveh. Shortly afterwards, its final divinely appointed king, Sin-Shara-ishkun, was dead. Despite Assyria's principal cities being in ruins, the Assyrian Empire held out for an additional 3 years until 609 BC, when its last ruler, Ashurbanipal II, fled to Egypt and was never heard from again. The Assyrian Empire was gone but never forgotten. What events led up to Assyria's humiliating and devastating end as a political and military powerhouse? Who were the men in charge of Assyria during its final 3 decades? This online lecture will provide a portrait of Ashurbanipal's lesser known and less successful successors. After the lecture, we invite you to stay updated on the latest news and events of the ACF by following us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. I will give you the links to all the social media platforms in the chat. But now I'd like to invite Mr. Robert de Calera to just share a few words about today's lecture. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and welcome, Dr. Novotny. We are really honored to have you here and looking forward to a lecture on the last period of Imperial Assyrian history. So we look forward to your insights of the many texts. Dr. Novotny has translated many texts over a long period of time. And so he has a lot to tell us about the last days or last even century of the Great Assyrian Empire. So with that, Dr. Novotny, please, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for inviting me here today to speak about the lesser known kings of the Assyrian Empire, men who lived in the shadow of the last great king Ashurbanipal. So the way I'm going to try to read a little bit of my introduction, and then I'll go into a more free form for the rest of the talk. So, all right. Classical sources give an account of the final days of the Assyrian Empire, an event also documented in one cuneiform source, the so-called Fall of Nineveh Chronicle. According to the History of Persia, written by Cestius, a Greek physician living at the Persian court in the late 5th century BC, the last king of Assyria, Sardanapalus, a man identified with Ashurbanipal rather than his son Sin-Shara-ishkun, the last king of Assyria to have ruled from Nineveh, committed suicide, and when he thought Nineveh was about to fall, he burned his palace down around him. This account narrates the Assyrian king's tragic death as follows. Then the king, Sardanapalus, gave up hope of being saved. To avoid falling into the hands of the foes, he prepared a massive pyre in the palace and piled it on gold and silver, as well as all of his royal garments. Then he shut up the concubines and eunuchs into the room which he had got ready. In the midst of the pyre, he consigned himself together with them and the palace to the flames. This account, which inspired Lord Byron's tragic Sardanapalus and Eugene Delacroix's La Mort de Sardanapale, appears to have conflated Ashurbanipal's death with that of his brother Shamash-shuma-ukin. And I believe you have heard a lecture recently on the war between Shamash-shuma-ukin and Ashurbanipal. And Shamash-shuma-ukin, according to Ashurbanipal's inscriptions, was burned alive in his palace in late 648, or that of his son Sen-shara-ishkun, who died when the Babylonians and Medes sacked Nineveh in 612. And I'll come back to the later event later in the presentation. Ashurbanipal, Assyria's last great king, a man presumably known to all of you, inherited the kingdom at its height. Okay. Slight technical, there we go. Issue, okay. So first thing I want to say is that all the dates in this presentation will be BC or BCE. So that's just a quick comment. In the mid 650s, a few years before Egypt declared itself independent with the help of mercenaries, and before Shamash-shuma-ukin, the king of Babylon, rebelled against Assyria, the Assyrian Empire reached its apex. Ashurbanipal's vast territorial holdings stretched from the Zagros Mountains in the east to the Mediterranean Sea and Cilicia in the west. Ruling from the capital of Nineveh, Ashurbanipal managed his extensive kingdom with the aid of his trusted officials, including at least 71 provincial governors. Moreover, the empire had close ties with no less than 39 client states, including many important Phoenician port cities in the Levant, men who regularly supplied building materials for construction projects in the Assyrian heartland, the so-called Ashur-Nineveh-Arbela triangle, and you can see this triangle highlighted in the map. Although Ashurbanipal declared victory over his older brother in late 648, when Shamash-shuma-ukin committed suicide or was killed, or when the citizens of Babylon voluntarily opened the city's 8 gates, the strength of the Assyrian Empire was waning, and its reputation was in tatters. The loss of Egypt as a client state a few years earlier did not help. The punitive military campaigns that Ashurbanipal launched against Elam in 647 to 644 only made matters worse, especially after the Assyrian army had destroyed the Elamite religious capital, Susa. The well-oiled machine that was the Assyrian Empire was visibly starting to rust, and if its collapse had not been yet written on the wall, it was at least imaginable, something that would have been unfathomable only a few years earlier. Assyria's fortunes continued to decline during Ashurbanipal's final years on the throne, as well as during the reigns of his successors, Ashur-etil-ilani, Sen-shuma-lishir, Sen-shara-ishkun, and Ashur-uballit. Ashurbanipal's inability or failure to closely manage the transition of power, as his father Esarhaddon and his grandmother Nakiah had carefully done, further weakened Assyria, both at home and with its contemporaries, especially in Babylonia, as members of the royal family and influential officials vied for power. In 612, as we've heard, less than 20 years after Ashurbanipal's death, the once grand and once all-important Assyrian metropolis Nineveh was captured and destroyed by a Babylonian-Median alliance led by Nabopolassar and Cyaxares, and his final Ashur-appointed king, Sen-shara-ishkun, was dead. 3 years later, in 609, The Assyrian Empire ceased to exist when its last ruler, Ashurbanipal II, fled the city of Haran before an advancing Babylonian army and was never heard from again. The Assyrian Empire was gone, but never forgotten. As the period after the death of Ashurbanipal as the period after the death of Ashurbanipal until the complete and utter collapse of the Assyrian Empire is probably not known to some of you, or maybe even many of you. And since I wrote about this theme a few years ago, I decided it might be a suitable topic for the Assyrian Cultural Foundation's Nabu Circle of Lectures. Unlike Ashurbanipal, his father and grandfather Esarhaddon and Sennacherib, Assyria's last four rulers are particularly not well known today. This is quite unfortunate. Thus, I hope to bring these men out of the shadow of their more famous and infamous predecessors, even for a short period of time. So before I dive into a portrait of these four last rulers of Assyria, I want to talk a little bit about some of our principal sources. One of the things that we have in this 20-year period, so roughly the period between 631 and 609 BC, we have very few principal contemporary sources that shed light on the political history of the period, very little information about the rulers themselves. This is in stark contrast to the reigns of Sargon, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and the first two-thirds of the reign of Ashurbanipal, where we have numerous contemporary sources. And one of the things that you'll notice in my PowerPoint is that I generally do not have contemporary images of the kings themselves. And this is because we do not have the sources, we do not have the images. So for the period in question, we have very few contemporary sources that shed light on the period. And what we have here is we do have sources that provide the chronological framework for the last decades of the Assyrian Empire. So we have information from documents that modern scholars refer to as king lists. So Babylonian King List A, the Uruk King List, the so-called synchronistic King List, and the Ptolemaic Canon. All of these sources combined help us reconstruct the historical framework. So we have a sequence of Ashurbanipal's successors. So without these texts, it would be very difficult to determine which of Ashurbanipal's sons immediately succeeded him. So we know from these texts that Ashur-etil-ilani was Ashurbanipal's first successor, and his other son, Sin-shar-ishkun, came afterwards and was the last divinely appointed king of Assyria to rule from its capital, Nineveh. A late Neo-Babylonian inscription of the last king of Babylon, native king of Babylon, Nabonidus, his mother, Stela Atagupi, also gives us a good historical framework of the period. And the Babylonian Chronicles, which I believe probably some of you have heard of, detail year-by-year accounts of some of the events that took place between 626 and 609 BC. And the main sources are the so-called Chronicle of Nabopolassar's early years, the very well-known and very accessible Fall of Nineveh Chronicle, which I will be relying on quite a bit in this talk. And then also a lesser-known chronicle is the so-called Akitu or New Year's Festival Chronicle. And this gives us a few additional details about the time period. What we're missing are some very important material, and it's quite unclear whether some of these texts would have existed in antiquity. So, for example, the Assyrian king list, the latest copy of the Assyrian king list that we have ends with the year 721. So, this ends with the rulers of Assyria up to Shalmaneser V. So this is the predecessor of Sargon II. So this would be Ashurbanipal's great grandfather. So whether copies of the Assyrian list were prepared after this time is unknown, but the last copy that we have is dated, ends with Shalmaneser V, so ends with the year 722. We have what we're also missing is the eponym list. So this is important for internal dating of a text. So royal inscriptions, legal transactions. So we do know that commerce and business and legal transactions continued well after the death of Ashurbanipal. We have so we have numerous legal transactions from private individuals, from the royal court that come from the last decades of the Assyrian Empire. But of course, trying to create an exact sequence is impossible because the eponym list that we have ends with the year 649. So this is halfway through Ashurbanipal's reign. What we're also missing is the native Assyrian eponym chronicle, and this ends during the time of Sennacherib, or at least the copies and fragments that we have. And we're also missing Babylonian chronicles for the period between the years 649 and 627. So this is the second half of Ashurbanipal's reign down to the end of Ashur-etil-ilani's reign. So we are missing some very important documents that would help us better reconstruct the period, not only from a political view, but also from a legal transaction view, which is kind of really interesting because there are numerous sales documents that are taking place in and throughout the Assyrian Empire. So legal transactions, what we have here is what I've already said, that we have numerous royal, legal, private transactions throughout numerous sites of the Assyrian Empire, principally from the Assyrian heartland. And what these illustrate is that the daily life in the Assyrian cities continued and prospered well after Ashurbanipal's death. So this is extremely important. Just because Assyria's last great king dies doesn't mean that the economy died with him. We do have a few transactions from the western part of the empire from after the fall of Assyria. So we do know that from a business standpoint, that life continued after the fall of the political system. What is also important in terms of kind of detailing the reconstruction of the period is that we do have documents that are dated from Babylonia. And what this tells us is that some Assyrian rulers held authority in some cities in the south. We know from these documents that Ashur-etil-ilani had control over the city of Nippur, or was recognized as having authority over the city of Nippur for 4 years. Then we have a period of confusion, and I'll come back to this, is that we have dated documents to Senshuma-Ilishir and Senshar-Ishkun. Senshuma-Ilishir, we have documents from Babylon and Nippur that are dated to his first regnal year or his accession year. And then what we have for Senshar Ishkun is that for his first 7 years as king, he was sometimes recognized as an authority in Babylon, Nippur, Sippar, and Uruk. These documents will play a great role in determining who was in control of Babylonia from 626 to 620, because sometimes Senshar Ushkun is in control, and sometimes his main rival, Nabopolassar, the founder of the Neo-Babylonian, is sometimes in control. So these documents help trace the struggle for domination over Babylonia between 626 and 620. And if you were in control of the city, the document, when it was dated, was documented by your reign. So that's quite fascinating. And I mentioned here a very shadowy figure, probably. Yeah, he's a little bit tricky. So Kandalanu is a king of Babylon. He's a contemporary of Ashurbanipal and Ashuri-Telilani, and his we have documents dated to his 21-year reign plus a posthumous 1 year, and this posthumous 1 year is 626, and this is a year where Senshar Ishkun and Nabopolassar are vying for power, and neither has uh, officially become the king of Babylon. And if you read through some early literature, Kandalanu is sometimes identified as being Ashurbanipal, and this is definitely not the case. And I expect that this might come up in the question and answer period. So, other sources. Um, this is going to give us a very idealistic perspective, principally dealing with building activities of the kings. So we have inscriptions for only 2 out of the 4 final kings. So we have 6 inscriptions of Ashur-Telilani. Most of these come from Babylonia. So the only ones that come from Assyria are bricks from Kalhu, so biblical Kalak. And this is coming from the Nabu temple that his father Ashurbanipal worked on, and also his brother Shamash-shuma-ukin. So we have very few texts for Ashur-Telilani. And we have slightly more inscriptions of his brother Senshar Ishkun. We have 21 texts, and all of his inscriptions come from Assyria, and they come from a wider variety of objects, and they all come from the Assyrian heartland. So we have cylinders, prisms, bricks, and you can see here in the slide, we have a brick inscription of Senshar Ishkun, and this is from the Nabu temple at Ashur, and then we also have a fragment of a clay cylinder from the city of Ashur, also dealing with the Nabu temple at Ashur. And kind of, let's say, in terms of size, if I just hold this pencil up, it's slightly longer than my pencil here. So it's a quite small object. So you can have it in your hands and roll it and read it. The bricks are much larger, and they can be quite heavy. They can be up to 50, 60 pounds. I've tried to lift one once, and it was not fun. Then what we have is we have some tax exemption grants, and this is shown in the slide here. And this particular fragmentary document, and there's 2 different texts, so we can kind of reconstruct some of the damaged sections. So Ashuri-Telilani granted land to individuals who helped his chief eunuch, who was Senshuma-Ilishir, And these men helped Ashur-etil-ilani onto the throne. And because of these deeds, they were granted certain exemptions from taxes. So what you can already see just kind of by the names is that we see that Sen-Shuma-Lushir is the chief eunuch, who later is a king of Assyria. So we can see that there's going to be a little bit of chaos involved in this period of time, especially when Ashurbanipal died or was deposed, and also when Ashur-etil-ilani was when the people rebelled against Ashur-etil-ilani. We also have two fictional pieces of correspondence. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about this, but if you invite Mary Fraser to your lecture series, she can give you lots of details about these fictional texts. And these two late copies come from the Hellenistic period. And what we have is fictional correspondence between the Assyrian king Sen-Shar-Ishkun and the contemporary Neo-Babylonian king Nabopolassar. One appears to be a so-called declaration of war. We have a literary text, the Nabopolassar epic, also very fragmentarily preserved, and this provides a few details about the period that we're discussing here tonight. And then we also have some classical sources. So, for example, we have the 3rd century BC Hellenistic era writer who is a priest of the god Marduk in Babylon. So Berossus, we have information from his Babylonica, and I will refer to at least one of his texts later. So now we can finally move on to our portrait of the different kings. So what as I mentioned before, I don't have any images of these kings. So unfortunately, what you're stuck with is that I'm sometimes showing you very fragmentary, ugly looking clay tablets, maps, or plans of buildings. And this is because we do not have visual evidence of the last kings of Assyria. So unlike Ashurbanipal, who constructed a palace and had the lower walls decorated extensively with reliefs of war, lion hunting, the king enjoying himself with his queen in a garden with the head of the king of Elam Teuman hanging from the branches. Unfortunately, we do not have such luxuries in dealing with the period of Ashur-etil-ilani and his successors. So the first question, and this one is very difficult to answer, and this is going to be the case for many questions for this last period of Assyrian history, is how and when did Ashur-etil-ilani come to power? This is very difficult to answer simply because we don't have the sources and we have conflicting information in sources, or the sources don't provide the information in a way that we like. But from what we can gather, and we can only gather this from a tax-exempt record, is that it's quite clear that Ashur-etil-ilani came to power through the help of the chief eunuch Sen-Shuma-Lishir. And sometimes you'll notice that the name is spelled differently here, and this is because sometimes I'm using the standard Babylonian form, and sometimes I use the Assyrian form, and this is a little bit tricky simply because the scholarly literature prefers to use the standard Babylonian forms rather than the Neo-Assyrian form. So the form that we have here is simply just the Neo-Assyrian variation. So Sen-Shuma-Lishir and Sen-Shuma-Lishir are one and the same. But what we can see from this document here, and this is a translation by Bob Whiting from the State Archives of Assyria, series volume number 12. what we can see here is that Ashur-etil-ilani comes to power with the help of the chief eunuch. And it's quite clear that a certain Nabu Utsur was a main enemy of the king and his family. So how and when the revolt took place is a little bit unclear, but presumably the revolt may have taken place after Ashurbanipal's death. Of course, we don't know if Ashur-etil-ilani came to power after Ashurbanipal died, or if he was deposed, or if he abdicated the throne. We have no information, but it is clear that in Ashurbanipal's last days or shortly after his death, there was a rebellion, and it is thanks to the chief eunuch, Sin Shumalishir, and his men that Ashurbanipal's son, Ashur-etil-ilani, comes to power. And because we have the chief eunuch assisting the king coming to power. Is generally assumed by scholars that Ashur-etil-ilani was very young when he became king. There is nothing in the textual record to support this, so this is merely an assumption of scholars. So if you've ever watched Karen Radner's Coursera course on making Assyria, Assyrian power the Assyrian way, or making an empire the Assyrian way. I can't remember the exact title. She has a nice history section where she uses Playmobil figures, and Ashur-etil-ilani is represented by a very young boy. So this is generally the scholarly consensus, is that he was underage and he required somebody who was established and in power to install him. We do know 100% that he was the son of Ashurbanipal, and this is quite clear because this is regularly recorded in his inscriptions. All of his inscriptions refer to him as the son of Ashurbanipal, and then he goes into great detail saying that he was also the grandson of Esarhaddon and the great-grandson of Sennacherib, and exceptionally, the great-great-grandson of Sargon. So he came to power with the aid of the chief eunuch, Sen Shumalishir. This is clear, and it's presumed that this took place in either 631 or 630. 631 seems to me possible, and this is because the last dated economic document that we can firmly establish as the reign of Ashurbanipal comes from this year. So this comes from a Babylonian document that clearly states that this document is dated to the reign of Ashurbanipal. So the earliest that he could have come to power is 630, but based on the possible dating scenarios, he could have come to power in 630. His reign is mentioned by Nabonidus's mother Adad-Gupi in her stela, and his reign is also mentioned in a synchronistic king list. He is not included anywhere in any Babylonian king list, and this is because he was never the king of Babylon, and he was a contemporary of Kandalanu, who was the Ashurbanipal appointed king of Babylon. And interestingly, both Ashur-etil-ilani and Kandalanu die in the same year. So they die both in 627. So I'll come back to this year because it's the first year of chaos, both in Assyria and also in Babylonia. What we do know from documents, and these are from the dated documents from Nibu, is that he reigned for 4 years. This is quite clear from these economic documents. So economic documents can be quite important for reconstructing chronology, and economic documents are particularly important for the last years of Assyrian history. And what we do have as a slight contradiction is that the Atagupi Stela says that he only reigned for 3 years. The documentation of kings in the Atagupi Stela is a little bit tricky to work with, because there seems to be a couple of errors and little pieces of misinformation. And this happens to be that the information was compiled from other chronographic texts, and sometimes they were misinterpreted. And this misinterpretation comes from one of the Babylonian chronicles, where there's a confusion between Ashurbanipal's regnal dates and Shamash-shum-ukin's regnal dates, which means that there is at least 1 year discrepancy. I've argued that there might be as many as 2 years discrepancy in Atagupi's dating. But the reason that Atagupi even mentions Ashur-Talilani is that she is living in Haran. So she is a citizen of Assyria while the Assyrian Empire exists. She is probably one of the people who is deported from Haran in 610 BC by Nabopolassar. So, from her point of view, the sequence of kings is Ashurbanipal, Ashuri-Telilani, and because then she is absorbed later into the Babylonian Empire, she then has to credit Nabopolassar and his successors as the kings. So what happens is that Senshar-ishkun, Ashurbanipal, even though she was living in Assyria during the reigns of those kings, have to be excluded, because then she is working from a Babylonian perspective. So you could have a whole lecture on the dating, trying to understand the dating of the Atagupi stela, and there's lots of different theories and problems with this text. But Atagupi does state that Ashuri-Talilani reigned 3 years. This is in contrast to the dated documents that say that he reigned for 4 years. And because the economic documents are contemporary and not much later, those are much more reliable. So if we try to fit the period between Ashurbanipal's death and the fall of Nineveh, we have to say that he reigned 4 years, and then he at least ascended the throne in 631, but officially took power in 630. And what I mean by officially taking power is, in order to be officially the king of Assyria, you have to participate in the Akitu festival at the beginning of the year. So in the month of Nisan, so the end of March, beginning of April. So when you take the hand of the god Ashur, you then legally become his earthly representative. So before that, you are the king, but not divinely sanctioned as the king. So, what did Ashur-Etelilani do during his 4 years? Unfortunately, we have very little information about this, and the information we do have comes from the 6 inscriptions that I referred to earlier. And what we do know from Assyria is that he sponsored construction on the temple of Nabu at Kalhu. So the name of this temple is Ezida, which means true house or true temple. But like his father, Ashurbanipal, he carried out construction in Babylonia. What we can see from various texts is that he dedicated various objects to the god Marduk. So, Marduk being the patron deity of the city of Babylon. He also had objects dedicated to Marduk in the city of Sippar. So what we do know is that he had a gold-plated table dedicated to to Marduk, and these tables would have been used during feeding ceremonies and perhaps during other rituals. We do know from brick inscriptions, so we do have the physical evidence that some construction took place, is that he renovated two temples. So he renovated a temple in the city of Dilbat and also in the city of Nippur. So this would be four cities in northern Babylonia. Babylon, if you just want a perspective here, is roughly 78, 80 kilometers south of modern day Baghdad. And I have all five of these cities shown in the map. Depending on your screen size, you might be able to see it more clearly. So here he's renovating the Nabu temple at Kalhu, and then in the south, he is engaged in several building activities. So at Sippar and Babylon, he is simply dedicating objects. These are generally wooden objects with gold or other types of metal plating. And on those metal plating, we have short inscriptions. Of course, we do not have the original gold plated or metal plated objects. What we do have is tablet copies of the text. So these are archival copies or drafts. But we do have evidence from Dilbot and Nippur that workmen physically carried out construction on at least two temples. This is following very much in the footsteps of his father, Ashurbanipal. We know from a variety of very small clay cylinders and tablets of uncertain provenience that the Assyrian king returned the body of the Chaldean sheikh Shamash Ibni, and this sheikh had rebelled against Ashur-Talilani's grandfather Esarhaddon, and this particular recalcitrant ruler was taken back to Nineveh in 678 and executed. So probably to curry favor with the tribal leaders and people of the Bitdakuri tribe, the bones of this ruler were returned. So he was trying to curry favor in southern Mesopotamia with the Bitdakuri tribe. Why he decided to do this, we don't know. That this is not recorded in the text. It could be that he saw a potential rival in the south and wished to curry favor and gain support in case of a rebellion. So that this is just speculation. This information is not recorded in the text. So that's all we really know about Ashur-Talilani. We don't know whether or not he carried out any military campaigns, simply because we do not have any royal inscriptions or any other chronographic texts recording such information. So if military campaigns took place during this time, we do not have that information, unfortunately. Okay, so yes, so chaos is going to ensue. So this is the year 627. So this is the first of two very unstable years. I had a difficult time trying to figure out how I was going to represent this slide, and I decided it was best to take something more from the biblical side, where we have the construction of the Tower of Babel and the confusion of tongues. I could have equally chose a very nice Assyrian relief depicting a siege of a city or the deportation of people, but I thought this might be a little bit more appropriate since Babylon will figure a little bit into the conversation here. So what happens in 627? So I've kind of tried to break it up a little bit into what do we know for certain and what do we not know. The certain things are only a handful of things that we know, and the uncertain things are quite abundant. So there's going to be lots of different ideas what could have transpired during this year. So I'll give you a traditional view and a less traditional view. So, what do we know for certain is that this shadowy figure known as Kandalanu, the king of Babylon, he dies. He dies very early in the year. This is quite clear from the economic documents that he died in either the first or the second month of the year. So, very, very early. What we do know is that Ashur-etil-ilani dies or is at least removed from the throne at this time, but this will take place much later in the year, around the eighth month of the year. What we have also is that we have our eunuch who had previously put the young Ashur-etil-ilani on the throne. He seizes power and declares himself king. We have Senshar-ishkun, who is another son of Ashurbanipal, who ultimately, before the year's end, becomes, without a doubt, the next king of Assyria. That this is absolutely clear. So he's going to be the victor in the north. Then in the south, we have Nabopolassar. So this is the founder of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So he is a man from a prominent family in Uruk, who was probably also an important member of the local administration while the kings of Assyria either directly or indirectly ruled Babylonia. We know that he is consolidating power in Babylonia. He is not yet in a position to declare himself king or to take the throne. We do know from other documents that he appears to have been also a general or a important military person during the reign of Ashurbanipal, and the same is true with his father, who was a contemporary of Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal. So Nabopolassar is a man from the south, so he's coming from the city of Uruk, so he's going to consolidate power. So what we have is the death of two kings, and then what we have is we have three people vying for power. We have Senshar-Malishir, we have Senshar-ishkun, and we have Nabopolassar. So exactly how the events themselves transpired is going to be very unclear. And this is because we do not have the documents. What we're relying on here to try to come up with a sequence of events is that we're looking at the date formula of Babylonian economic documents from Babylon, Sippur, Nippur, Uruk, seeing who is being recognized as authority. And of course, this is, can be by chance because if we find new dated documents, those documents can throw potential proposals out of whack because a document might be earlier or later than we previously thought. So, can I go back? Okay, so a lot of the theories on what's happening here really is going to be dependent on how we view Sen-Shumalishir. So just to kind of set the scene, so I mentioned Karen Radner's Coursera course. So the figure used for Sen-Shumalishir, the chief eunuch who put Ashurbanipal on the throne, he is depicted as a vampire wearing a tuxedo. So that kind of sets the scene that the traditional view is that Sin-Shumalishir was a power-hungry eunuch who wanted to take the Assyrian throne for himself. I'm going to throw out another option is that there is no reason to suggest that he could not have been a staunch supporter of Ashuri-Telilani. So we'll come back to these different views. So who was he exactly? We do know that he was the chief eunuch. We have this from the tax exemption documents, and we have two of those. And we have a reference to a all-powerful chief eunuch in the Nabopolassar epic. And this is presumably the same Sen-Shumalishir. Unfortunately, the name is not recorded in the text. He's just referred to by his title. We do know in the year 627, so this is the first year of chaos, that he was recognized as a authority. This is clear from Babylonian King List A, the Uruk King List, as well as date formula of documents from Babylon and Nippur. And Nippur is a staunchly supportive Assyrian center in northern Babylonia. What is very unclear is whether or not he was a member of the Assyrian royal family. You have some people who suggest that he was not a member of the royal family, and you have other scholars who believe that he was a member of the royal family. This does not mean that he was necessarily a son of Ashurbanipal, but he was a member of the extended royal Assyrian family. We just do not have any information to support whether he was a member of the royal family or not. I think in my book recently, when I talked about Sen-Shumalishir, I followed the view of Eckhart Fromm, who said that he was not a member of the royal family. And quite recently, I think late last year, Julian Reed has come out with the argument that, oh, he absolutely must be a member of the royal family. We can't decide. We don't have the text. So we can either say he was a member or wasn't. I personally think he wasn't, but that doesn't mean anything, but he could have been. So what is the traditional view? So based on the very, very scant sources that we have, so this is really a reference or an allusion to a period of disruption in Senshar-Ishkun's inscriptions that Senshar-Ishkun came to power through a little bit of chaos in which he was contending for the throne with his brothers. And also from the economic documents that we have in Babylonia. So this is our source material. So what the traditional view is that in Assyria, Sen-Shumalishir declared himself king. So he rebelled directly against the young king Ashuri-Telilani, who he had supported earlier, and then took control of parts of Assyria as well as parts of Babylonia. And for at least 8 months, he would have vied for power with Ashur-Telilani, Senshar-Ishkun, and perhaps other members of the royal family. So the other members of the royal family, this information is alluded to in Senshar-Ishkun's inscriptions in the prologue, where the king is saying that the gods selected him among his family members to become the king. So whether this view is correct or not cannot be supported. I have a completely different view in that this is based on the date formula of the Babylonian documents from Babylon, Nippur, Sippar. is that when Kandalanu died, so he died very early in 627, it's quite possible that as a reward for his prior service, Ashur-etil-ilani sent his chief eunuch to become the next king of Babylon. So because Sin-shuma-lishir had proved himself so reliable in the past, Ashur-etil-ilani might have thought, I can trust this man. He helped me. He should be rewarded. And what better reward than he should become the next king of Babylon? So at the beginning of 627, after Kandalanu died, news reaches the Assyrian capital. Sin-shuma-lishir is sent to Babylon. Sin-shuma-lishir held a lot of power. So when he left, there was a power vacuum and civil war broke out. Then, when Sin-shuma-lishir heard about the civil war, he marched back to Assyria, declared himself king, and fought among his principal rivals. And this would have been Sin-shar-ishkun. And these two men would have vied for power. What we do know is that Sin-shar-ishkun and his supporters gained the upper hand. And presumably, Sin-shuma-lishir was forced to retreat back to Babylonia. And his fate would not be great because he had to then contend with Nabopolassar, this powerful man from Uruk. If we are to believe the Nabopolassar epic, Nabopolassar executed Sin-shuma-lishir, the so-called all-powerful chief eunuch in Babylon. So was Sin-shuma-lishir a power-hungry eunuch who decided that Assyria was better under his control? Or was he simply reacting to events that took place and he was trying to protect and help and keep his Ashur-etil-ilani on the throne? We simply don't know. These are two contradictory views, one accepted by most scholars and one recently proposed by me. There could be other numerous situations. So exactly who was Sin-shuma-lishir apart from being the chief eunuch, it's impossible to tell. He might be, as everybody suggests, a power-hungry eunuch, or he could have been a very staunch supporter of the royal power. And because he held so much authority and power in Assyria, when he left, there was a major power vacuum, and then all hell broke loose. So then we're going to come to kind of the second year of chaos. So what we do know is that Sin-shar-ishkun eventually gained the upper hand, and this might have been somewhere around the 8th month or 7th month of the year. This is based on economic documents. So the last economic documents dated to Ashur-etil-ilani's reign are from the 8th month. What I'm suggesting is that once Sin-shar-ishkun gained the upper hand, Sin-shuma-lishir retreated south. And based on the Nabopolassar epic, what we have is the death of the chief eunuch. So it's quite possible that Sin-shar-ishkun joined forces temporarily with Nabopolassar, and this agreement was really to remove Sin-shuma-lishir from the picture, and this man was executed in a very public fashion. What we do know from the Babylonian Chronicle is in late 626, in the 8th month, Nabopolassar ascends the throne of Babylon. So he unofficially becomes the king of Babylon. Officially, he becomes the king of Babylon 4 months later when he takes the hand of the god Marduk and participates in the New Year's festival. What is clear from both the Babylonian Chronicle and also from economic documents that this alliance, if there was one, was very short-lived, and Senshar-Ishkun and Nabopolassar began vying for power. And this power struggle for Babylonia will last for an additional 6 years. So now we have a more stable environment, at least from the who is in power. So by the end of 626, Senshar-Ishkun is without a doubt the fully and authoritative figure in Assyria. So he is recognized as king. Nobody is contesting his power. And in Babylonia, Nabopolassar is now firmly in control. We know from Senshar-Ishkun's inscriptions that he is a son of Ashurbanipal. Is he older, younger, a twin of Ashur-Talani? This is difficult to assess. There is one word in one of his inscriptions that seems to suggest that he might have been a twin brother, but does that necessarily mean that he was the twin brother of Ashur-Talani? We don't know. He might have been a older brother of Ashur-Talani who was overlooked at the time by Ashurbanipal because he may have been regarded as being too old to take the throne. The name is quite clear that this must be a throne name or it doesn't make sense as a birth name unless unless he was born in 669, which would have put him in his 40s when he came to the throne. But that's not so unusual because men like Nabonidus came to the throne when they were 60. So the name means the moon god seen has established the king. So the name is a little bit unusual. So it suggests that it might be a throne name, and this name with the moon god making him king could be alluded to in some of his inscriptions. So I have a nice passage here from a inscription of Senshar-Ishkun, and what you can see here is that at the beginning of my kingship, after the gods Ashur, and the list here, chose me among my brothers and desired me as king, guided me like a father and a mother, killed my foes and cut down my enemies. So this reference to killing foes and cutting down enemies and choosing among brothers, this is the passage that seems to infer that Senshar-Ishkun came to power during some type of civil and or political unrest. And this seems to have been the case for the year 627, which I've described. So if this is not a throne name, and it was actually his birth name, as I said a few moments ago, that this name would have been given to a son of Ashurbanipal in 669. So we're looking at, so he would have been quite old when he came to the throne. Ashurbanipal and Shuma-Ukin came to the throne when they were in their late teens, early 20s. So you can see there's quite a difference. So the name is a little suggestive, and I've always kind of believed that this was a throne name that he took on when he came to power after a civil war and not his birth name. So what we know is that, and I'm going to kind of break up what we know about Senshar-Ishkun is, I'm going to talk about his fight for control of power, then his building reports, and then kind of his demise. But what we know from the Babylonian chronicles is that he was regularly engaged in fighting for control over northern Babylonia with Nabopolassar. This is clear from the chronicle of the early years of Nabopolassar, and also from the dated documents from various Babylonian cities. So we can see, based on the date formula, that Nippur, Babylon, Sippur, Uruk changed hands multiple times during this 6 year period. And in 620, what is quite clear from both the economic documents that have dates and also from the Babylonian Chronicle is that Nabopolassar gained control of Babylonia. So he booted Assyrian authority permanently from Babylonian soil, and Nabopolassar in his inscriptions regularly refers to removing the Assyrian presence from Babylonia. So that's quite important. So the early years of Senshar-Ishkun is spent fighting for control over northern Babylonia, which he eventually loses. What he is doing in Assyria, so off the battlefield, is he's conducting major building activities. So Senshar-Ishkun has a much longer reign than his brother Ashur-Talilani. So Ashur-Talilani is only reigning for 4 years, so there's not much you can do. If you live in a major city and you've ever walked past a building site that says, this building project will be done in this time, and then 5, 6 years later, that sign is still there, and they keep changing the date. So, for example, here in Germany, the Stuttgart train station, which was supposed to be finished, I believe, in 2017, is still under construction. So it's a continual building site. So building projects take much longer than expected, or much longer than the Assyrian roll inscriptions tell us. What we do know is that Senshar-Ishkun is very active in the Assyrian heartland. And what I have here is a nice map of the core Assyrian cities. So Ashur, Kalhu, Nineveh. And what you can see is that the cities are to scale. So you can see that the Assyrian religious capital is significantly smaller than the Nineveh, at least the city of Nineveh as it was starting in the time of Sennacherib. So Nineveh is extremely large as compared to the very small Assyrian capital Ashur. So what we know from royal inscriptions, and we have 21 royal inscriptions of Senshar-Ishkun, is that he is very active in building and working on temples. From what I can see, most of this work was probably carried out before the year 615, and this will be quite clear in a few moments when we talk about the final wars with Nabopolassar, is that starting in 615, Nabopolassar brings war to Assyria. So at Kalhu, he is continuing work on the Ezida temple. So this is the Nabu temple at Kalhu. So he seems to have completed his brother's work. So Ashur-Talilani is only on the throne 4 years, so he doesn't have much of a chance to do the work. And of course, if the beginning of his reign and the end of his reign are consumed with civil war, that really restricts on how much building Ashur-Talilani would have had. And of course, the Ezida temple was also renovated by Ashurbanipal, also by Ashurbanipal's father, Esarhaddon, and probably also his grandfather Sennacherib. So the Ezida temple was extremely important and was continually worked on. In the administrative capital, it's very clear that Senshar-Ishkun made repairs to the city wall. So this is the 12-kilometer, the massive city wall. I can't, and this will be a problem later on because, of course, the city has 18 gates. So this is a massively long wall. So he's making repairs to the mud brick structure. And he's also renovating part of the Southwest Palace. And the Southwest Palace is the palace of his great grandfather Sennacherib. This is the so-called palace without a rival. So this is the Sumerian name Igal Zagdinu Tukua, so the palace that has no rival. I have a nice satellite view here and a reconstruction of the citadel by Julian Reed. So Senshar Ishkun's inscriptions refer to the work on the Alabaster House, and this is without a doubt Sennacherib's palace, which he had lined the lower parts of the walls with limestone slabs. So the famous Siege of Lachish relief, I think everybody knows that. But what we can tell from the archaeological record is that he partially redecorated some rooms as well as remove some of the former images. And so the suggestion that he's removing former images from the wall suggests that he was planning to sculpt new images for himself. So what those images would have been presumably would have been images of war. So presumably had he had more time, he might have depicted some of his battles against Nabopolassar in northern Babylonia. So from the Assyrian inscriptions, unlike Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, Ashurbanipal, Senshar Ishkun's inscriptions only detail building projects. There's no reference at all to any extensive foreign military campaigns. So it's quite possible that he could have been planning to resculpt some images of some of his victories in Babylonia before, of course, he lost those cities. And you can see on the plan here, the dark areas are the areas that have been securely excavated. So you really have, for Sennacherib's palace, really about a third of the palace that's been explored, and the other two-thirds has not. And you can see the same thing with Ashurbanipal's palace in the north here, is that very little of the palace itself has been explored. So in the religious capital of Ashur, he worked extensively on the Nabu temple, and most of the information we have about his building projects are about this temple. Unfortunately, I couldn't find my color slide, but the Nabu temple is the one that is here in the lower right corner. And it's quite clear from the plan that this temple was modeled on the Nabu temple at Kalhu. So Senshar Ishkun's inscriptions describe in detail how he reconstructed this temple. And what we do know is from the dates that are on the text. Unfortunately, we don't know the exact sequence because the eponym list giving the sequence is not preserved for this time period, is that it took at least 4 years, if not longer, to rebuild this temple. And rather than kind of describe the building activities in great detail, I present here a translation of the relevant section of this very fragmentarily preserved cylinder inscription. But what he claims to have done is that he built the temple on its original plan, on its former site, and this work, as expected, began on a favorable day in a favorable month. And then he made a stone foundation upon which he built the brick superstructure. and then he returned the statues of the gods Nabu and Tashmetu. Um, this is a little bit problematic when one looks at the archaeological record. I don't think I can go back on this due to the nature of it. But what is quite clear is that there was no original earlier plan of the Nabu temple. The earlier remains that you saw are earlier incarnations, versions, plans of a Ishtar temple dating from the Middle Assyrian period and earlier, so up to the time of Tukulti Ninurta II, and the Ishtar temple that existed in Senshar Ishkun's day goes back to the reign of Ashurashi Ishi I. But if we look at the archaeological remains, it would have been impossible to have built the temple on its former plan and its former site simply because there were no previous independent Nabu temples. And if we look at the plan of the temple, it's quite clear that this plan is an exact model in the main features of the Nabu temple at Ezida, and the Ezida temple at Kalhu dates back to the 9th century. So based on the archaeological record and the plan, that this temple did not exist as it is in the time of Senshar Ishkun before, but I think it's clear from a stone block that his scribes and his workmen found this out much later after they had been touting about building this temple according to its Middle Assyrian plan, that they realized that, in fact, Senshar Ishkun was not building the temple on earlier remains of a Nabu temple, and this is attested only in a single text. But if we take royal ideology here, we have kind of a false building history, a false interpretation, and it's only thanks to the detailed archaeological excavations by Walter Andre that we can contest what Senshar Ishkun is doing. But this project, so this building of the Nabu temple, seems to be the biggest project of Senshar Ishkun during his reign. So moving on to the last section of Senshar Ishkun. So up to 615, so this is his 12th year as king, Senshar Ishkun, with the assistance of allied troops from Egypt, was able to keep Nabopolassar at bay. And this is mostly because battles were fought between the two rulers, either in northern Babylonia or in the Middle Euphrates region, and not on Assyrian soil. Of course, this is all going to change in 615. And this is when Cyaxares, the king of the Uman Manda, these are the Medes, joins the fight. In that turn of event year, Nabopolassar invaded the Assyrian heartland and attacked Ashur. He failed miserably. And we know this. So all the events that I'm talking about here, these are all coming from a single source. And this is the so-called Fall of Nineveh Chronicle. And so this is our only source for the period between 615 and 609. So unfortunately, we have to rely on a single event. So Nabopolassar attacks Ashur, the Assyrian religious capital, which is the southernmost Assyrian city in the heartland, well, at least major city. After failing to take the city, he was forced to retreat south as far as the city Takrit. And this is the modern Takrit, so kind of northern Babylonia. And this is presumably because Senshar Ishkun sent troops. So in the following year, 614, Cyaxares, the king of the Medes, marched straight into the Assyrian heartland and roamed around effortlessly. So the Assyrian king was unable to stop the Medes from going directly into the Assyrian heartland. So the Medes are marching directly past Nineveh. Presumably, Nineveh is too well fortified and too large. So the Medes attack Tarbasu and they capture it. And this city is in very, very close proximity to the Assyrian capital. Then the Medes march south past Nineveh. They seem to capture or at least do some damage to Kalhu, and then they march down the Tigris straight for the religious center, and they capture and destroy the Assyrian religious capital. This is devastating, and this is devastating because, of course, the Ashur temple, so the main shrine of the Assyrian god, is destroyed and plundered, and all of the lovely cult objects and other objects displayed in there are then removed. This is perhaps the first major tragedy. This has never happened in the Assyrian history, is that the Ashur temple is destroyed and the Ashur cult is broken. This means that if you want to participate in the Akitu festival. This is not going to be possible. This is devastating. This is terrible. So upon hearing this news, Nabopolassar marches north, like he's moving really fast. He's probably on his chariot. And he's moving north and he meets Cyaxares and the two forge an alliance. This is going to be the death blow to the Assyrian Empire. So this unexpected union definitely gave a fresh impetus to the years-long war between Senshar-Ishkun and Nabopolassar, and probably also removed any hope that the Assyrian king might have had about the survival of his kingdom. Senshar-Ishkun could clearly see the writing on the wall, and he took what measures he could to fortify Nineveh. And I'll show you some pictures in a few minutes. In 613, if not earlier, in 614, Nineveh's gates were reinforced and narrowed with massive blocks of stone. So the wide gates were massively narrowed and supported by stone. This is important, especially when you have 18 access points to the city. Just in comparison, Babylon only had 8 city gates, and also Dur-Shurukeen, Shargan's capital, only had 8. So the death blow for Senshar-Ishkun and his capital came during the following year. So this is 612. And unfortunately, all of the preparations that Senshar-Ishkun made, so all the new fortifications, are not going to be sufficient to hold back this joint Babylonian-Median assault. So after a 3-month siege, from the month of Simanu, so the 3rd month, to the month of Abu, so the 5th month, so these are our late spring, early summer months, Nineveh fell and was looted and destroyed. So what you can see in the slide here is that we have the stone blocks that are used to narrow the gate. I know that there is some current archaeological work going on in Nineveh by 3 different teams. I think there's an Italian team, there's a German team, there's an American team, and they're doing some work on some of the gates. And what you can see here is a photograph taken from the late 1980s, I think 1989, right before the first Gulf War, is that you can see the skeletons of the men who died defending the city. So this is a quite stark image. So it's quite clear that Nineveh was penetrated and it came to a very violent end. Before the city succumbed to the enemy, it's quite possible that Senshar-Ishkun died. Unfortunately, the true nature of his death, whether he committed suicide, was murdered by one or more of his officials, or was executed by the troops of Nabopolassar or Cyaxares, is not recorded in cuneiform sources. This includes the fall of Nineveh Chronicle. And so what we have here is the fall of Nineveh Chronicle, and what we can see is that we have a square bracket indicating that we have a restoration, and we have in italics that he died. This is just a suggestion. I mean, it's quite clear that we never hear from Senshar-Ishkun again, and there's no reference to Nabopolassar taking the king of Assyria away. The death of Senshar-Ishkun is alluded to in a classical source. So this is the Babylonica of Berossus. And we have two different versions. I'll start with version 2. So what we have is so this is the Babylonian king, moved to attack Nineveh, so Ninos. So knowledge of this reached Sarakos, and Sarakos is, of course, the Greek name of Senshar-Ishkun. And then what we can see is that he had his capital burned. So here it's a little bit vague on who the he is, whether it's Senshar-Ishkun or it's Nabopolassar. But we have the main text, or at least a variant of it, where we have Sarakos dismayed at his attack, so referring back to the Babylonian king, burned himself together with his palace. So what we have here is we have a reference, at least several centuries later, to Senshar-Ishkun burning himself alive in his palace when Nabopolassar and his Median allies sacked the city. And of course, we can question this a little bit because we have reference to Ashurbanipal in classical sources, burning himself alive in his palace. Of course, Sardanapalus might be confused with Senshar-Ishkun, who might have burned himself alive in his palace. But then we also have, from contemporary Assyrian sources, we have records of Shamash-shuma-ukin burning himself alive in his palace. So whether or not Senshar-Ishkun burned himself alive, committed suicide in order not to be captured, is questionable. We don't have, we have that information from very light sources, and because we have two other kings, a king of Babylon and also a king of Assyria, also having the same fate. We can be a little bit skeptical about this. But I think at the end of the day, what we have in 612 is that Nineveh has been captured. We do have evidence from the Southwest Palace, so Sennacherib's Palace, and also North Palace, that there was extensive damage done. It's quite clear that the invaders were very careful in meting out their destruction. So if you're looking at the Siege of Lachish relief, you have this very nice relief, and then you have the face of the Assyrian king chiseled off. So it's a very deliberate destruction, and we do have evidence of fire in various parts of the palaces. So what we have is at the end of 612, well, halfway through 612, is that Nineveh has been captured after a 3-month siege. The last divinely sanctioned Assyrian king from Ashur is dead. And then it's not quite over, but of course, we know how this is going to end, is that we have a man who is called Ashurbanipal, who is Senshar-Ishkun's heir designate, who declares himself king in Haran. And you can see from the map here that Haran is located significantly west and north of the Assyrian heartland. So on the border of modern day Turkey and Syria, just on the shores of the Balik River. And this is a major cult center and provincial center. So it is the main Assyrian provincial center in the area. It's extremely important. Ashurbanipal rebuilt the moon god temple. If you've heard, also Nabonidus rebuilt this on behalf of his mother Adagupi. So we have a member of the royal family declaring himself king. Um, well, I mean, he will never ever become the official king of Assyria. So he's the last ruler. He's the forever crown prince, and this is because he cannot take the hand of Ashur in the city of Ashur during an Akitu festival. So he can never 100% ever declare himself properly 100%. I'm the king of Assyria. And this is because Ashur, the statue, is either been damaged and then taken back to Uruk, so Nabopolassar's main center, and also the Ashur temple and the Akitu temple have been destroyed. So it's impossible for him to become king. What we know from our one single source, so unfortunately, this is what we have to work with, is that in the year 611, so after he declares himself king in the west, we have no direct conflict between Assyria, Babylonia, and the Medes. But this will soon change. So in 611, what we have is that Nabopolassar is marching about in the Assyrian heartland, but he's not having any direct conflict. So we probably have some deportations of high profile individuals. Probably you have the looting of the temples and palaces. But in 610, what we have is we have a direct conflict. So Nabopolassar and his Median allies march up the Euphrates to Haran, where they fight Ashurbanipal and his Egyptian allies. What we have is Ashurbanipal is fairly wise and he is probably undermanned and he flees before the Babylonians and Medes arrive at Haran. And when the Babylonians and Medes arrive, what do is they capture the city, they destroy the city and loot its temples. This is probably the moment where Nabonidus' mother is deported to Babylonia. So 610. So this ends also the existence temporarily of the moon god cult, which is only reestablished during the reign of Nabonidus, the last native Babylonian king. And then what we have is the establishing of a Babylonian garrison. So Nabopolassar establishes an outpost before he leaves. Then in 609, the text gets a little bit muddled because it's a little bit damaged, but Ashurbanipal and his Egyptian allies march on the city and they massacre the garrison. And what then happens is that Ashurbanipal seems to disappear before Nabopolassar returns. The text is a little bit vague, but it's clear that there isn't a battle between the two men. And by the time Nabopolassar returns, Ashurbanipal is gone. And what we can see is from what we have in our documentation from the Babylonian Chronicles, we never ever hear from Ashurbanipal again. So presumably he is living out his final days in exile in Egypt. Probably this is voluntarily. And of course, Nabopolassar and the Egyptians vie for power in the Levant. So 609, this is the last that we hear of an Assyrian ruler, and he is not officially king. So when you read literature and they refer to Ashurbanipal as the last king, really it should be the last ruler, simply because he never takes the hand of the god Ashur. Um, so coming to the end here, you can see from the number of times that I've said, oh, this is possible, this is suggest, oh, here's the theory, this is theory. It's a very difficult period to assess from a political, chronological standpoint. And this is simply because we have so few texts. And some of the texts that we have are very fragmentarily preserved. You can see here on the left side is the reverse side of the Fall of Nineveh Chronicle, and it's fairly. Yeah, it's not so bad. I mean, I've worked with worse texts, but this is a very problematic, difficult period to assess from a textual point of view. And I think if we're lucky, one day we'll have more text that will illuminate and allow us to better assess the history of Ashurbanipal's lesser known successors. So his young son, Ashur-Lani, the chief eunuch, Sensumalishir, the better known son of Ashurbanipal, Shuma, Sensual Ishkun, and also the forever crown prince Ashurbanipal. So thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully you learned a little bit about Assyrian history tonight.